Hey, welcome back to another episode of Working Your Metabolism. My name is Katie Gonzalez. I'm from the Dominican Republic. If you don't understand me at any point, please feel free to let me know. The reason I'm doing this summit is because I've struggled to lose weight, even dieting and exercising. Today, I'm beyond excited to introduce you today to Betty Mulray. She's a nutrition expert, certified functional medicine practitioner, and a speaker. Betty Mulray, she's a PhD candidate, MSCN, IFMCP. She helps women over 40 harness their hormone to lose weight, optimize sleep, restore energy, and thrive in life. During her, during her research for her PhD, Betty made four key discoveries that lead to hormone imbalance that plague women over 40. Restoring balance to, to those key metabolic pathway is the basis of her hormone reset program, which has helped her and her client lose weight with ease, restore sleep, and turn up their energy. She's the host Functional Life podcast and the founder and CEO of Living Well Dallas Functional Medicine Center. Betty is the frequently featured nutrition expert on Fox News, broadcasting CW33, NBC, and CBS. Welcome, Betty.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you, Betty, for being with us today. Can you tell us your story and what motivated you to get into the work that you're going to do doing?
Yeah, I'm quite a bit older than you are. So I was a kid of the 80s, and actually I really enjoyed nutrition and fitness. And originally when I went into college, I thought I was going to go into medicine. But to me at the time, it sounded like it was too much school. I'm just going to be real honest. I was a little bit on the lazy side. So I ended up going into a business degree, came out, went into corporate America, started working, and I ended up getting pulled into the technology boom in the early 90s. So I was a tech person. And at the time I was working hundreds of hours a week. I was just killing myself, burning the candle at both ends. And I had digestive problems that would come and go when I was a kid, and they were really sporadic. So kids from the 70s, your parents were like, unless something fell off of you, you were usually okay, right? So we didn't really think much of it. But when I got into that time period of my life in my 30s, it really ramped up. And I ended up being diagnosed with colitis, which is an autoimmune digestive disorder. And I was lucky enough that it wasn't a really horrifically bad case, but it was enough that the doctor was telling me I'm going to go on these biologic drugs and they're going to suppress my immune system. And so I asked what I thought was a very basic question. Could I change my diet and do something with my lifestyle to improve this? Because I could tell that stress would make it worse. If I didn't eat certain things, it seemed to change it a little bit. And he literally barked this laugh in my face and said it had nothing to do with what you ate. But if you can already tell, I'm a little sarcastic. So my response was a little bit colorful back to him. And I was so angry that something so basic as what we eat was assumed to have nothing to do with like a digestive disorder. I just said to myself at that point, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to learn a little bit about nutrition. I spent my free time, I think probably like a lot of your listeners, and this is way pre-internet, right? So I'd be on, reading stuff, buying books. So I just sort of dove in. I started taking classes. I took a health coaching certification, and I went back to get my first master's. And once I got in there, it really clicked, and so I ended up immersing myself in that. But at this point, now I'm in my mid 30s and I start getting acne. I'm exhausted. My periods get weird. I have raging PMS. Like if I had said what was going on in my head, somebody would have put me away. And I was like, this hormonal thing is just killing me. And, I was able to get my digestive stuff under control, but really my hormones were just all over the place. And I saw, people that were kind of fledgling functional medicine people in the early 2000s. I was put on different medications and all this stuff, and nobody could fix it. And so, so this was always this piece of my life that I was looking at. And so my 40s, I would say my 40s were a decade I just didn't enjoy, because I was always fighting with it because there's so many hormonal changes that happen. And so now I've really kind of dedicated my professional career to helping women really recover this stuff, right? And so that's kind of how I got here, I think it's unfortunately a very true story for most women. Our hormones plague us.
Absolutely, Betty. Weight loss advice is often simplified down to the idea that cutting carbs to control insulin result in fat burning, or that a slow thyroid must be the cause of weight gain, or even stress cause weight gain, all of which are somehow true. But you say this view is short-sighted and misses other key hormone that might be causing yo-yo weight gain and weight loss resistance. What is what is isn't talking here? Like what is? Can you tell us?
Yeah. So, so what's interesting, so a lot of the women that I work with are really in that, 40 to 50 range. But like I said, their problems usually start in their 30s, like mine did. So there's a couple stats that I'd like to just let everybody know. So the average woman, her metabolism slows 5% for every decade we're over 20. So by the time you're 40, we've got 10 to 15% slowed metabolic rate relative to what we were at 20. And when a woman goes into menopause, she experiences 10 to 15% increased body weight. So for somebody that's 150 pounds, that's an extra 15 pounds automatically at a minimum, right? So we have to look at it and we say, okay, so as a woman, we have this automatic slowing of our metabolism because we're also fertile and we're what's required for humans to be on the planet. Because let's face it, we need one really hot man and a bunch of fertile women, right? And then the humans could continue. Really, honestly, that's the way the nature looks at it. So we're also wired to conserve, to go through feast and famine, to be able to carry a baby in a famine state. And any woman that's ever gone on a diet with a man will tell you, like, they just stop doing beer and pizza and it comes off. But as a woman, we're like, okay, I'm doing lettuce, I'm doing cold chicken breasts, doing water, and nothing happens. So there's a bunch of things that are happening with our hormones. And often, yes, it may affect our thyroid. Like you said, is the thyroid the problem? Or, is it just getting carbs out of the diet, because carbs are bad? I won't say carbs are bad or carbs are good. There's a lot of things going on. So the first thing we have to recognize is that most Americans, particularly, or anybody that lives a Western lifestyle, 88% of the population in the United States are assumed to be insulin resistant at this point. And 1 in 3 Americans by 2030 will be a diabetic as an adult. So we have an epidemic. So one of the first things we have to know is, as humans living a Western lifestyle, we've lost metabolic flexibility. So what that really means is your body is waiting for carbs because you've been feeding it carbs and crappy food that's processed and not real in many cases. And so when you go to burn fat, your body doesn't really know what to do with it. So we've lost this flexibility of being able to burn carbs, burn fat when we need it, go through a little bit of famine. And so the body, every time, if it's not getting what it needs, it just slows the metabolism down. And it's all part of that pathway. So ultimately what's happening is we have hormones that are the problem. We have insulin, which controls fat storage. So it either takes blood sugar to the cells to burn. So it says, okay, I'm going to shove all that in the cell, or it's going to take it to fat storage. So when we lost that flexibility, we're wired to store fat first. And then all your hormones are a symphony. So they play together. So if you're a woman that just had a baby and your hormones are all over the place because you had a baby, you're going to have an interplay between your sex hormones, which are the ones that help you be fertile, and your insulin and your thyroid and all that other stuff. So we can't ignore that. And so most common diet approaches just say, oh, we're going to cut carbs, so you just affect insulin, but it doesn't address these other hormones. They're out of balance. So we have to look at that and say, okay, as a woman, what are our major hormones that are out of balance? So we've already established that 88% of us have a problem managing blood sugar, and we are wired to store fat first. The other part is, especially when we come out of pregnancy, we have this fluctuation of estrogen and progesterone, and we just had both of them be very high when we were pregnant. Now, often is as you enter into your late 30s and 40s, what's happening is progesterone, which is one of the 2 hormones that fluctuates that cause your period, it's automatically declining. So it's on the downhill slope. That's why as we get into our 40s, we start to see fertility issues. So here's the thing. I remember reading this when I was in school, when I first went back to school. They call a pregnancy over the age of 29 a geriatric pregnancy, which means old, right? So that means like senior citizen version of pregnancy. And it's because we were wired to have children in our 20s. So by the time you hit your 30s, it's already on a decline. When you get to your 40s, it's rapidly declining. And so what that does is it leaves most women in that late 30s to 40s where you have more estrogen than what you need relative to your progesterone. So your hormones are out of balance. So I don't know if you experienced that, but for me, one of the first things was all those things I was talking about, like PMS, acne. Like I got started getting acne on my cheeks, along here, and chin. And I didn't have acne that much as a kid, but I got it then. And so all those symptoms that we start to get are signs of it. Estrogen and insulin perpetuate each other's problem. So if I have higher insulin after I eat, every time I eat, because my metabolic engine's broken and my estrogen is high, my body is wired to store fat. And that's so much why women struggle relative to men.
Amazing, Betty. You came across key research that is not getting talked about during your PhD that indicate that hormonal and sex hormone slows cellular metabolism and turns on the fat switch in the cell. Can you share that?
Yeah. So, like I said, everybody's kind of talked about these big hormonal messages, but, I kept thinking there was something else going on because, if it was just about hormones, we know how to replace those today. We can give you thyroid hormone, we can give you testosterone, we can give you progesterone. So inside the cell, right? So you got to remember we have a cell and we have receptors on the outside of the cell. So think of the receptors as like key locks, and our hormones are the keys. So when the cell needs to get a message, the hormone will come up to here, turn on the key, and then change what the cell is doing. So for example, if the thyroid hormone is clicking into a cell, it turns the key and turns the engine up, makes the engine run very quickly. So we have receptors on our cells for all these hormones. And so we have, whether it's insulin or estrogen or progesterone or thyroid. Well, estrogen has a very particular role inside the cell and particularly inside certain tissues. So like the breast tissue, the ovaries, those hormones like turn on breasts, right? It's when we start to create breasts, when we start our period, that starts to create the feminizing feature. But they also affect our cells, like the powerhouse in our cell. So the powerhouse is a thing called the mitochondria. And so the mitochondria are what actually burn your fuel. So when you're talking about like burning sugar or burning fat, it's what's responsible for really doing that process. It turns up the energy. So when we look at the mitochondria, it does basically estrogen does 4 different things. So the first thing that happens is we can burn fuel in that little powerhouse called the mitochondria, or we can burn it out in the kind of outside the powerhouse wall in like a little campfire, right? Both will create heat, both will create energy, but the campfire is much slower. So we have this slowing of that activity inside the actual mitochondria. So the estrogen activity is going to slow that. One of the ways it does that is it increases uric acid activity inside the cell when estrogen starts to decline as we go through menopause. So when it's fluctuating wildly in your 40s, we can get changes in this cellular byproduct called uric acid. So uric acid gets produced inside the cell. If it gets produced at high levels, it starts to shut down your powerhouse. So think of it as like all of a sudden that powerhouse gets turned down. So all of a sudden, instead of it running at full speed, it starts running at half speed. And it's literally the change in estrogen that is affecting it. So as a woman that might be in your late 30s or 40s, that change may fluctuate. You might get, heavier periods. So it might be really high during that point and then fall lower. So you get these more wild symptoms. So the symptoms that you're experiencing are part of that, but inside the cell, you're getting this sort of up and down message on whether you want to turn up the fireplace and turn up the engine. The other thing that happens is we have a pathway called the polyol pathway, and it's how the body can take glucose and make it into fructose. So glucose is our primary sugar that circulates around the blood. So when people talk about blood sugar, that's the form it's in. But fructose is another sugar that we get from fruits. We also get it from high fructose corn syrup, agave nectar, and a bunch of other things. Fructose metabolizes differently than glucose. It bypasses insulin's control, so it doesn't have a real controller. And fructose gets preferentially stored as fat inside the liver and preferentially stored as fat, particularly around the abdominal area and in the fat in the muscles and on your hips and thighs. So when we have changes in estrogen, we get an amplification of this activity of this pathway. So there's an enzyme in the body that can take your glucose in your blood sugar and convert it to glucose. Okay. Fructose. So it takes glucose and converts it to fructose. So what that means is you could be eating a really healthy diet, not eating any high fructose corn syrup, which if anybody's doing that, stop it, never, ever have it again, ever. And don't drink your calories because they make you fat, period, end of sentence. There's no way around it. And your body has the capacity to take your blood sugar and convert it to fructose on its own. And that's part of our survival mechanisms. It's what actually allowed humans to survive famine because, again, our body will store fat preferentially. But if I'm having a soda, a regular soda, I'm turning that on all the time, right? But if I turn on this enzyme pathway because my hormones are changing, it means my body's trying to do it too. So we have sort of this natural predisposition as women to turn up this engine of polyol production, which makes us less capable of burning fat.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's, and our nervous system changes. So, we have nobody likes junk in the trunk, right? Nobody likes having fat on our hips and thighs. Now, thankfully, as a woman with a butt, I am so thankful the butt's in. When I was younger, it wasn't, and it, wasn't coming off. But we don't necessarily love that jiggly bits on the outside of our body, right? The stuff that shakes and creates cellulite. Yeah. We have a transporter that takes sugar from outside the cell in the muscles and pulls it in to get burned. And it's a thing called GLUT4 that goes to sleep as you go through your 40s and 50s. Literally, it almost shuts down. So it becomes really hard. You're like, oh my God, this fat on my hip came on really, really quick, but it won't come off. So it's first on, last off. And so we have just all these little things that are happening that sort of mess with our body's ability to burn fat. And so, if we look at it, we say, okay, now that we know that, we've got to address some of the hormones that are fluctuating in a woman to control that. It's not just as simple as cut the calories out or cut the carbs, because there's too many things at play.
Thank you, Betty. Wow. Amazing. What about our genetic analysis has become quite popular? Do you think the answer are in our genes?
Yeah. So, so one of the things, so I'm a scientist. And so I looked at it and I said, okay, I was never a naturally skinny girl. I wanted to be, but I wasn't, right? I'm short, I'm stout, I'm strong. And especially when I got to my 30s, late 30s, early 40s, I struggled carrying an extra 30 pounds that I could not get off. And you got to know, I'm a nutrition professional. I have all the right answers before I really went back and looked at this research and had access to people that could give me anything I really needed. And none of it was working. So I wanted to look at it and I go, why do some women not have a problem? You probably have a friend that eats like French fries and cheeseburgers and nothing happens. And you're like, that's not fair. And so I was like, what's different between me and this other person? So genetics are, 25 years ago, we went to map our human genome. And so our genome is what makes our hair color, our eye color, it encodes for how our body works, what our body does with our hormones. And 95% of our genetics are identical between people. But that 5% that make up the uniqueness of us, there's wild genetic variability there, right? And so what we see is we get one gene from mom, right? We get one gene from dad. So, and that makes who you are. And when you have a mutation on a gene, what that means is you have a variation in that instruction manual that is less common than the larger population. That's what a mutation means. It doesn't mean it's a defect or something bad. It just means there's something slightly different in your instruction book and there's less people with that instruction than everybody else. So there's a bunch of genes that affect our hormones like estrogen and progesterone and insulin, but particularly the ones that affect how we manage our estrogen, our primary female hormone, that make us less capable of taking estrogen that we've used and getting it out of the system. right? So our hormones get used. So think the key gets used, it gets dirty. We're going to take it and wrap it up in a bunch of tissue paper and I'm going to throw it away, right? And we need to be able to do that. And some people can do that really efficiently. So they take the trash out every day. It doesn't get stinky and funky in your kitchen. And then other people, we can't get rid of it. I happen to be one of those people. And so some of those hormones, I can list a few of them, the CYP1B1 hormone, COMT, there's also the MTHFR gene. Those are some of the big ones that affect that. So if you are mutated on those, you have a less level playing field than someone else. And so learning someone's genetics and being able to test that allows us to further personalize what we need to do for someone, because those genes that I listed, when you're mutated, you have a greater risk for obesity, a greater risk for cardiovascular disease, estrogen sensitive cancers like breast cancer and ovarian cancer. And it's because we can't get rid of our estrogen compounds. And then if you look at the toxins in our environment, right? So the plastics, the herbicides, the pesticides, all of the phthalates and other things that we put in, like, the little plugins and all the scents and fragrances, those all act like estrogen in your body. And so we have this huge burden of estrogen-like compounds and you can't get rid of it. So our genetics do play a role, all the way down to your genetics can tell you kind of, are you a better fat burner or carb burner? I'm not good at either. Awesome. My body's not really great at either. So I have to work around my genetics. So it plays a role. And so if we're able to uncover that, we're able to then get really personal about what you have to do to sort of reverse it. Because again, so some people don't have the genetics, so it's easier for them. But even the people that are genetically mutated, not everybody has the problem, which means we can change it. Because I think that's the important part, because people listen to this and they go, oh man, I must be screwed. I must have terrible genetics. What am I going to do about this? I don't know how to fix it. But that's the beauty of it. Once you uncover what's going on, you're able to identify it, then you're able to change it.
Thank you, Betty, so much. How do you address this issue to help women to rebalance their hormone and cellular metabolism?
Yeah. So I want to say a couple things. So you guys are going to all be too young to know this. I was born in 1969, but if we look back, even in the 70s, there was very little obesity in the United States, right? The obesity percentage was really low. So our genetics were there already. Our hormones were already there already. The toxins in our environment radically went up since then, but it was relatively rare to see obesity. So what we need to know is that this is a new phenomenon, and it's wired around our environment. So the things we're getting exposed to and what we're putting in our body, right? So that means it's not set in stone. That means that we can change it. And once we do that, we're able to fix things. So when we look at it, we have a couple of things that I always think about. So I mentioned a little bit of this. So I want to make sure that I'm not doing things that slow down my metabolism. So slow down that little powerhouse in your cell, the mitochondria. And I want to make sure I'm not doing things that drive insulin, our fat storage hormone, higher. And I want to make sure that I'm doing things that hopefully make my sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone, more balanced, right? So the first thing I think about is, like I said it before, do not do high fructose corn syrup, fructose, corn sugar, any of those things. Any place where you find refined fructose in food, you want to remove. So the first thing is like sports drinks, energy drinks, your sodas, juices. So I meet people all the time. They're like, oh, I love juice. And I'm like, yes, you can juice your own fruits and vegetables, but you want to make sure that you're not doing this much fruit and this much vegetable. Right? Because when you remove the fiber by juicing it, all you're getting is the sugar. So juices and things like that are just basically soda under a different name. So you don't want to drink calories, because that's just going to drive the two mechanisms: fat storage at the liver, right? Because the liver is going to just take that fructose and store it in your fat, and it's going to drive up insulin resistance. And the other places it hides are things like ketchup, right? All your barbecue sauces. Like, the best thing you could ever do is go to the grocery store this weekend and look at your favorite stuff. the stuff in the middle of the grocery store, right? So all the healthy foods are usually on the outside. It's the middle of the grocery store you want to stay away from, right? And flip over the bags, bottles, or boxes of all the stuff that you love. Start reading the label and look for, high fructose corn syrup, or HFCS, right? If it says that. Bread, I'll give you an example. Bread, it's usually the second ingredient because it's also a preservative, right? So you're getting tons of this and you don't know it. So that's the first thing, is don't do stuff that's going to basically turn on fat storage. The other thing that I mentioned was that we have a compound we make inside the cell called uric acid. And uric acid is literally the off switch for your mitochondria. So it turns off the powerhouse. And that is designed like that. Every animal on the planet has that same mechanism, and it allows the animal to gain weight or not. Because only humans are the only animals that gain weight uncontrollably and get fat uncontrollably. And the animals we feed. Like, we'll do it to our own cats and dogs and stuff like that, but we are the only ones that do it uncontrolled. So uric acid is that switch. So the other thing that we tend to do is we eat foods that either have a lot of the stuff that makes uric acid or has compounds in it that will cause the body to do that. So what foods do that? So foods that have MSG, monosodium glutamate, right? So Asian foods, soy sauces, flavor packets. So if you're buying, like, let's say a brown rice, box thing that's got like a little flavor packet, so it has, let's say, Caribbean whatever, guaranteed it has MSG, or texturized vegetable protein, in it, which is going to raise uric acid. So the flavor packets that we have, no more of those, because all of that stuff drives this like slowing down of the metabolism. So all the flavoring agents usually do this. The other thing that does this is aged foods. So cheeses, like Parmesan cheese, charcuterie. So if you are, okay, women always tell me this, and I would say this, that their favorite thing to do would be have a glass of wine, have a little cheese board with a little salami. All of those foods will drive uric acid up, right? So aged foods like that. So things like salami, aged meats, wine, beer, hard liquor, refined stuff is going to raise uric acid, right? So we don't want to do that.
Wow.
Yeah. And that literally can be enough in your diet to drive that problem. Like, for me, that was a huge player, because it was something that I didn't do a lot, but it would be one of those things I'd go, oh, well, I'm having, a lettuce roll up. So I'd roll up some lunch meat with a little piece of cheese, with a little piece of avocado and lettuce. The cheese and the lunch meat was enough to drive up my uric acid. So just doing that stuff all the time can do that. The other thing that plays a really big role here is dehydration. So you've probably heard that if you don't drink enough water, it slows your metabolism. So when you're mildly dehydrated, it does slow your metabolism on average about 30%. One of the things it also does, if you remember, I was talking about that enzyme that allows us to take glucose and make it into fructose, and then we store more fat. When you're dehydrated, that enzyme turns on in everybody. And the reason is the body sees dehydration as part of starvation, because if I don't have enough water, obviously I probably don't have enough food. So this happens all the time. So if you go into a meal and let's say you're going to eat, vegetables, maybe some brown rice, maybe some black beans, all healthy, right? If you go into that meal and you're dehydrated, some of that healthier carbohydrates, the glucose in that meal, will get converted to fructose and stored as fat. And there's studies that Dr. Rick Johnson has done that showed that to be true, and many other groups. Like, it's very, very clearly cut. And the other part is when we look at the ability for the body to burn fat, particularly in women, and I was talking about, the jiggly bits on our hips and thighs that we don't love. To turn that on, we just need to move more. It doesn't necessarily mean that we need to kill it at the gym and spend an hour in there doing high intensity intervals, but we need to try and get more movement, because we have to overly stimulate that, because our body is not wired to stimulate mobilization of the fat off of there. It's very slow to do it. And so just moving more, walking more, just staying more active will help turn on that that sort of mechanism, you know, it's important.
Wow, I'm learning so much, Betty. Can you tell us about your program and how you is everything structured, like everything?
Sure, sure. So I have a program called the Hormone Reset, and it's really designed. And I've had women that went through it that were younger, but it's designed for the woman that's kind of hit her 40s and said, "Gosh, what happened?" You know. But like I said, my hormone weird stuff started in my late 30s, so you know everybody's a little bit different because I actually went through menopause at 49, so I was a little bit early to the game. So the program is really designed around that. It's actually 16 weeks, right? And it's cut up into 3 phases. So the first phase is identifying what's going on. So we do genetic testing, we do hormone testing to see what's really happening, so we can kind of stage what's happening. And then our goal is to ignite those metabolic pathways. So we very actively go after getting insulin sensitivity and helping the hormones balance out. And that's more of a therapeutic activity. So, you know, we're a little more aggressive in the beginning. And then the second phase is really to create that metabolic flexibility. Because one of the things that I really honestly hate about the nutrition industry is often, particularly online, it keeps getting promoted that your diet needs to get narrower and narrower and narrower. So all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm not allowed to have grains. I'm not allowed to have beans. Oh, I can't have fruit, right? And that all of a sudden there's no food choices. And sometimes we have to do those for different times. But if I'm metabolically flexible, I should be able to have some carbohydrates. I should be able to have a little higher fat meal because my body knows what to do with it. So the second phase is to help that metabolism become flexible again. And the final phase is to rebalance it and come up with your new norm where you're not dieting anymore. Because as somebody who's been on the planet 52 years, spent most of my life on and off some sort of diet or some sort of regimen, it's exhausting to constantly be thinking about your food and thinking about what you should or shouldn't eat, or can I have that, or what's this going to do? And so when we create that metabolic flexibility, a lot of that sort of mental mind power can go to other things. Because the other thing that I'm very much about is, you know, we have a lot of craziness, not to get into the politics and everything else that's going on in the world today, but to some degree, I see it as a war on women, right? And that we have a lot of women on the planet that have passion, power, purpose, and want to lead and leave a legacy. And I think a lot of times what's going on in our body and how we feel about this keeps us from doing that. So part of my goal is I want to help 1 million women so we can change the world, right? There's more of us on the planet than men. We just outnumber them. We just need to step into the power that we have and help bring equality and balance back, you know?
I love that video. That's true. Yeah,
Very much.
amazing. Do you find any challenge when those women come to you? Like, is there any challenge that you?
Yeah, you know, I'd say some of it, a lot of times it's we're having to break down preconceived ideas of what's healthy, what they have to do. Like I have a lot of women that are over exercising, you know, because they punish themselves for everything they think they've done. Like if they didn't lose a half a pound that day, the next day they punish themselves. And often I'm pulling them off that exercise because they're making their stress hormones too high, which will cause fat storage too. And so for me, a lot of times it's breaking down what we believe to be true and helping people understand there's a different truth. And so, you know, I'd say that's the challenge. One of the things that we do in our program is we have a group. So we have a community. We have calls with health coaches. We have calls with our clinical team, because the other part is we need support. Because most of the time there's people in our family, probably in our own home, that aren't necessarily super excited about what we're up to, you know, because a lot of times it's not a personal affront. You know, we may have a spouse, a partner, a friend, or, you know, family members that literally try to, you know, sabotage. And it's not that they don't want you to succeed. It's because it's a mirror on their own behavior. So if you're doing all these healthy things and they're not, what does that mean about them? You know, and so we need that support outside of our environment, because often our environment will drive a lot of the things that we don't want to do. We'll be pressured to do it, you know. So community, and having that community, I think, is super important. You know, so those are the things that we have to break down and sort of work through. You know, I also have, my program is also done in a kind of do-it-yourself model too, because not everybody can do the testing and things like that. because what I know is the 3 stages works. Like, even if I don't have somebody's genetics or I don't have testing, I know the process works because I've done it enough with my clients to see it. So there's always an opportunity to make those things happen.
Amazing. I'm glad you mentioned that, when you exercise, I spent like 2 hours exercising. I don't see no result. I get discouraged. So I'm so glad you brought that.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of that is determined by our genetics. Some of us are designed, like I'm designed to lift heavy things. I'm designed to do weight training, walk around a lot, and then, occasionally do a little bit of high intensity. Literally I do 1 high intensity exercise a week, and the rest is like 10 to 20 minutes of weight training. And then I try and just make sure I'm moving more. I did triathlons. I did it, I overworked out for years, and it caused more damage than it did good.
Yeah. And I've been learning that here, like doing the seminar. It's amazing. I've been learning so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Betty, is there anything you would like to add to this interview that we didn't discuss?
Um, I would say probably the last thing is it as a woman, sometimes I'd say all the time, it's very rare for me to find somebody that doesn't do this. As a woman, we always put usually our family and everybody else in front of us. Take care of the kids first, take care of our partner first, take care of mom, dad, sister, brother, all these other people. And then if I have a little ounce of something, I give it to me. And that doesn't do us any good, right? Because all it does is run us in the ground and make us unwell. And if mom's unwell, everybody's unwell. And so it's very hard because we've been trained to do that, by our society. And so if you struggle with doing things, you probably the majority of it is that feeling of self-worth. And I have to put myself on my to-do list, and I have to see self-care as something I must do, not something I will try and do when I have a moment when it's not for everybody else, right? We tend to be a satellite around everybody else. We take care of everybody else's stuff, but we never take care of ours. And I think that's hugely important, because by the time you get to my age in your 50s, and if you haven't been doing that, often we have a lot of things that we have to clean up because we've created environments that create chronic disease, and I'd much rather see somebody younger go ahead and get those, exercise that self-care muscle. And so they don't get here and have to do a lot of cleanup.
Amazing, Betty. Can you talk about the free gift you're gonna give us?
Yes. So we have, I have a really cool quiz. So I pointed out that hormones are a problem, right? And so I have a quiz about what your hormone imbalance type is. So you'll answer a bunch of questions, and it'll tell you, is it your thyroid? Is it your estrogen levels? Is it adrenal? What is it? Because that'll help you narrow down what maybe the major problem is. And so you'll have that, I guess, in the link. You can go to that, and you can also find me at bettymurray.com, and you can get to the quiz there as well. But it's fun. It only takes like 2 or 3 minutes, but you'll get your own personalized report from it.
Thank you. And the information is gonna be there. Don't worry about it. Website, everything. Well,
Cool.
Betty, thank you so much. I'm so amazing, like, to learn all of that, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Katie.
Okay. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. All right.
Bye.
Bye.